I had always been the one to give, to put my family's needs before my own, without hesitation. My name is Helen, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life caring for others. First my husband, who passed away too soon, and then my children, Jenna and her younger brother Max. I worked hard to ensure they never went without, making sacrifices that only a mother could understand. But when the email came from Jenna, everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting in my living room in my favorite armchair, enjoying my first cup of coffee. The sun was just beginning to peek through the blinds, casting a warm, golden light across the room. I had always liked this time of day, quiet, peaceful, the calm before the storm of the day's responsibilities. At 55, I had settled into a life of routine. My career as an office manager at a law firm wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I worked hard, I paid my bills, and I kept my family's world intact. I opened my laptop, expecting a casual message from Jenna about wedding details, something lighthearted, maybe an update on the florist or the cake. I had already helped her with so much, paying for the venue, the photographer, and all the other expenses that came with her dream wedding. My daughter had been the light of my life for so many years, and I would do anything to see her happy. After all, wasn't that what mothers did?
Hey, if you're enjoying the story so far, hit that subscribe button. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, and your support is crucial. It only takes a second and helps us grow. Thanks.
But this email wasn't what I expected. The subject line was blank. Just her name at the top, Jenna. And that alone sent a chill down my spine. I clicked it, thinking it would be a simple update, and as I began reading, my fingers froze. It started with a brief, detached, "Mom," and immediately I knew something was off. No "Dear Mom," no warmth, just a cold, matter-of-fact tone. "We've decided to keep the wedding small and intimate," she wrote. "We've finalized the guest list, and after a lot of consideration, we've decided it's best if you watch the wedding via live stream. I know this might be disappointing, but it's the only way to keep things simple. We'll send you a Google Meet link." I stared at the words, unable to comprehend them. I blinked, reread the email, and then my heart sank. Watch the wedding via live stream? Was this a joke? No, it wasn't a joke. There was no sign of humor in her words. It was final, cold, impersonal. "You can still be part of it," she continued. "It'll be just like being there, LOL." She even had the nerve to end the message with a casual LOL, as though the idea of watching her wedding on a screen, without being physically present, was some sort of joke. I sat there for a long time, my hands trembling as I closed the laptop. My coffee had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. My mind was racing. How had I gotten here? How had things come to this point where my daughter, who I had given so much for, could treat me like a stranger? I had always been there for her, when she needed help with her college tuition, when she struggled with her relationships, when she moved across the country to start fresh. I had been there through every tear, every triumph, every breakdown, and yet, here I was, excluded from one of the most important days of her life. I wasn't even going to be in the same room as her on her wedding day. How had I become so invisible? The silence in the room was deafening. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat there, numb, as the weight of the situation settled over me. I had spent my entire life giving, sacrificing, and loving, but all of that meant nothing now. To her, I was just an afterthought, a transaction. For a moment, I thought about responding with anger, with the hurt I was feeling. I thought about demanding an explanation, about telling her how much this hurt. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I had already been dismissed. The only thing left was to stop pretending. I opened the email draft and typed 4 simple words. "Sure, enjoy your big day." I didn't add anything else. No questions, no anger, just those 4 words. It felt strange, like an echo in a vast emptiness. I knew that this moment, this response, would change everything. It wasn't about fighting back. It was about taking a step back. I wasn't going to beg for her love or attention. If she didn't value me, then it was time to let go. I hit send. I closed the laptop and went into the kitchen to finish my cold coffee, pretending like it was just another day. But it wasn't. It was the day I stopped pretending. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in thought. But eventually, I got up, brushed myself off, and went to work like I always did. I drove to the office, the quiet of the car only amplifying the thoughts swirling in my head. How had I gotten to this point? I had raised her. I had worked overtime when I could barely afford it. I had skipped vacations to save money for her. Dreams! I had poured my heart and soul into making sure she had everything she needed. And yet, here I was, sitting alone in my car, wondering what went wrong. As I walked into the office, my boss, Robert, greeted me with a warm smile. He handed me a cup of coffee from the cafe downstairs and immediately noticed something was off. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice gentle but concerned. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to explain the pain I was feeling, the shock, the realization that my daughter didn't want me at her wedding. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled weakly and told him I hadn't slept well. He didn't push. His kindness, his concern, almost undid me. I sat at my desk trying to focus on work, but my mind kept circling back to that email, to that cold, heartless message from Jenna. I couldn't stop thinking about how I had been there for her every step of the way, and now she had just pushed me aside as though I didn't matter anymore. It was then that I realized something. I had given everything, and it wasn't enough. I had always been the one to put everyone else first, to sacrifice my own needs and desires for the sake of my family. But what had it gotten me? A daughter who didn't want me at her wedding. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to fight. But I did want change. I wanted my life to mean something more than just being the woman who always gave and never asked for anything in return. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, work, errands, the usual routine. But everything felt different. That email, those cold words, had created a shift inside me. I could no longer ignore the painful truth. My life had been lived for everyone else, and it had cost me. It had cost me my peace, my happiness, and my sense of self-worth. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe I was being too sensitive. After all, this was just a wedding. It was Jenna's day, right? But deep down, I knew something had been broken. The image I had of myself as the supportive mother, the ever-present figure in her life, was shattered. In its place, I was left with a feeling of emptiness, of invisibility. Sitting in my living room, I stared at the invitation once more. It had been sitting on the coffee table for days, a silent reminder of the emotional wound that had been opened. Jenna and I had been through so much together. I had seen her through her teenage years, her struggles with school, her heartbreaks, and the death of her father. I had always been the one she came to when things went wrong. But now, it felt like I was nothing more than an afterthought. I glanced over at the framed family photos on the wall. There we were, happy. There was a picture from her high school graduation, one from her first job interview, and countless others from family vacations. In each one, I had been right there, supporting her. But now, all of that seemed irrelevant. In that moment, I realized that I had been living for everyone else, and it was time to stop. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. But there was no warmth in my heart, only a coldness that had settled in after Jenna's email. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about all the years I had spent sacrificing myself for my children, my ex-husband, my family. I had poured my life into them, and I had gotten nothing in return. Jenna had always been my priority, but now I saw the truth. I had been a resource, not a person. I had been giving, and now, when I needed to be seen, I was cast aside. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. I was tired of living for others. I was tired of being the person who always put their needs before my own. It was time for me to take control. Time for me to finally live for me. I got dressed, grabbed my purse, and drove straight to the bank. The moment I stepped inside, the cool air hit me, and I felt a sense of clarity. I walked up to the counter, where Carlos, the branch manager, was standing. He greeted me with a warm smile, but I didn't smile back. There was no room for pleasantries today. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Collins?" Carlos asked, noticing the seriousness in my expression. "I need to cancel a payment," I said, my voice steady, almost too calm. "The one for the wedding venue? The one for Jenna's wedding?" Carlos hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing. "Are you sure? There may be a cancellation fee, depending on the timing." I nodded, my hands firm on the counter. "I'm sure." He looked at me again, as if searching for a reason, but I didn't offer one. I had no explanation to give. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about my dignity, about finally reclaiming what I had given away for so long. It was my time. Carlos processed the cancellation, and I signed the necessary forms. The moment it was done, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't going to fund a wedding I wasn't even invited to. I wasn't going to allow myself to be used anymore. The money I had planned to send next, the additional $50,000, was no longer mine to give. When I left the bank, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like a failure. I felt free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was doing something for myself. I was finally saying no to the people who had taken me for granted. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, I let the quiet settle over me. The birds were chirping, the air was cool, and everything felt peaceful. It was the first time in years that I had truly felt at peace. I had always been the one to put everyone else's needs first. My children's needs, my ex-husband's needs, even my friends' needs. But not anymore. This was my life, and I was done being the invisible one in my own story. I didn't respond to Jenna's calls, and I didn't read her messages. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I had spent too many years trying to make people love me, trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. But now I was done. I was done apologizing for having boundaries. I was done being the person who always said yes when everyone else said no. That night, after Jenna's endless text messages and voicemails, I made a vow to myself. I was going to live my life on my terms. I was going to stop being the one who always put others first, who always sacrificed herself for the sake of others. For the first time in my life, I was going to live for me. The days that followed my decision to cancel the payment were filled with messages and calls. Jenna's texts became increasingly frantic. "Mom, please answer. What's going on? Why are you doing this?" I couldn't bring myself to reply. The truth was, I didn't want to engage in a conversation that would only lead to more hurt. There was nothing left to say. I spent the next few days in a kind of numbness, moving through life but feeling strangely detached from everything. I went to work, ate my meals, took care of the usual chores, but my mind was constantly elsewhere. Had I made the right choice? Was I being too harsh? But deep down, I knew I had done the right thing. I had spent decades putting my family's needs above my own, always sacrificing for them, always trying to be the perfect mother. And where had it gotten me? My daughter, the one I had raised with so much love and care, had cast me aside like I was nothing. I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. The hardest part wasn't the cancellation of the payment or even the silent treatment from Jenna. The hardest part was looking in the mirror and finally accepting that I had allowed this to happen. I had allowed myself to be the giver, the sacrificer, the one who always put others first. I had done it out of love, out of a desire to be needed, to be appreciated. But now, in the wake of Jenna's cold email and the aftermath of my decision, I understood that my love had been taken for granted. I knew there would be fallout. There always is when you start setting boundaries with people who are used to you, being a doormat. But I was ready. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I finally decided to stop putting everyone else's needs before my own. At work, my boss, Robert, noticed my change in demeanor. He had been one of the few people who had ever really taken the time to get to know me, to see beyond the surface. When I walked into the office one morning, looking like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, he immediately pulled me aside. "You don't look like yourself, Helen," he said, his tone gentle but concerned. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated. I had always been the one to keep things bottled up, to put on a smile and pretend everything was fine. But not anymore. I couldn't pretend. I don't think I've ever really been okay, Robert," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life trying to make everyone else happy, and I've lost myself in the process." Robert listened patiently, not offering advice or trying to fix anything. For the first time in years, I felt seen. He wasn't judging me. He wasn't trying to tell me what to do. He was just there, offering his support. "You know," Robert said after a pause, "sometimes the hardest part of love is setting boundaries, especially with people we've given so much to. But it's necessary, Helen. You have to take care of yourself too." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized that this wasn't just about Jenna. It wasn't even just about my family. This was about me. It was about learning to love myself enough to say no, to set boundaries, and to walk away from toxic situations, no matter who they came from. The next evening, I was sitting in my living room, thinking about everything that had happened in the past week. The emails, the silent treatment from Jenna, the guilt that had been gnawing at me. But now, after talking to Robert, I understood something important. Guilt had no place in my life anymore. I had made the decision to live for myself, and that meant letting go of the need to please everyone else. If people couldn't accept my boundaries, then it wasn't my problem. I had to stop feeling guilty for taking care of my own needs. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. It was another message from Jenna. I felt a pang in my chest as I saw her name light up on the screen, but I didn't feel the overwhelming urge to respond. Instead, I simply stared at the message for a moment before putting the phone down. I was done. The next few days passed in a blur. Jenna's calls and texts grew more desperate, and Max, my son, also reached out, trying to mediate. But I was resolute. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had spent too long seeking it, only to be met with disappointment. One evening, I decided to take a long walk in the park near my house. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. As I walked, I realized that I hadn't felt this way in years. I hadn't felt this free, this at peace with myself. This was what I had been searching for. When I returned home, I sat down with a glass of wine and reflected on everything that had led me to this moment. Jenna's wedding was still coming, but I had made my peace with the fact that I wouldn't be there. This wasn't about the wedding anymore. This was about me reclaiming my life. I didn't need Jenna's approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. What I needed was to be true to myself, to stop apologizing for existing, for being human, for having needs of my own. And that, in itself, was the most empowering realization I could have ever had. As I sat there in my living room, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more arguments, more heartache, more moments of doubt. But I was no longer afraid. I had taken the first step toward a new chapter of my life, one where I was the priority, not anyone else. And that night, as I closed my eyes to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The days after my decision to cancel the payment and step away from Jenna's wedding were a mix of quiet contemplation and unexpected clarity. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't walking on eggshells, constantly wondering if I was doing enough for others. The guilt, which had once consumed me, began to dissipate, and in its place was a quiet confidence I had never known. I had been living for others for so long, for my children, for my ex-husband, for the people around me who, with time, had taken my kindness and sacrifices for granted. I had been the giver, the one who always put everyone else's needs before my own. And in doing so, I had lost myself. But now I was learning to live for me. It wasn't always easy. Jenna's calls still came in, each one more frantic than the last. Max, my son, reached out too, trying to bridge the gap between us. I could hear the hurt in his voice, and part of me wanted to cave. I wanted to explain everything, to make them understand my choice, but I knew better now. I wasn't going to explain myself anymore. I wasn't going to beg for validation. The moment I realized that my happiness couldn't be contingent on others' approval was the moment I took control of my life. I didn't need to justify my boundaries. They were mine to set. One afternoon, I received an unexpected knock on the door. I hadn't been expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there stood my best friend, Carol. She had been a constant in my life for years, someone who had always supported me, never asking for anything in return. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she immediately noticed the change in me. "You look different," she said, her eyes scanning my face. "You look lighter." I smiled, unsure of how to explain the profound shift that had happened inside me. "I guess I've finally stopped trying to make everyone else happy," I said softly. "I've decided to live for me." Carol stepped inside, her face softening with understanding. She had seen me struggle for so long, always putting my family's needs before mine. I could see the pride in her eyes as she listened to me. "I'm proud of you, Helen," she said, sitting down beside me. "It takes strength to do what you've done. You've been carrying everyone for so long, and now it's time to let go. It's time to carry yourself." Her words were like a balm to my soul. I realized that this wasn't just about Jenna. It wasn't even just about my family. This was about me finally learning how to live for myself, to choose myself. The following weeks were a mix of quiet healing and new experiences. I spent more time in nature, walking in the parks near my house, breathing in the fresh air, and appreciating the simple things I had ignored for so long. I started doing things for myself, things I had put off for years. I took pottery classes. I joined a book club. I reconnected with old friends. And for the first time, I realized something important. I didn't need anyone else to make me feel whole. Jenna sent one last message. It came late one night, a lengthy text that was part apology and part justification. She tried to explain her actions, claiming that she never meant to hurt me, that she was under a lot of pressure from her fiancé and his family. She asked if we could talk, if I would reconsider my decision to pull back from the wedding. I read the message once, and then I closed my phone. There was no anger, no frustration, just calm. I had made my choice. I didn't reply. A few days later, I received a call from Max. His voice sounded weary, but he wasn't angry. He was just sad. He told me that Jenna had gone through with the wedding, but it wasn't the fairy tale she had imagined. The venue had fallen through, the food wasn't as good as she had hoped, and the whole event felt forced and awkward. Jenna had even mentioned that without me there, something important was missing. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but I also felt something else. Peace. I had let go of the need to control the situation. I had made the choice to live my life on my own terms, and even though it wasn't easy, I knew it was the right choice. That evening, I sat on the porch, looking out at the sunset, and I felt free. There was no more burden of expectation, no more fear of disappointing others. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for others is to take care of yourself first. I didn't need to be there for Jenna. I didn't need to be anyone else's source of support if it meant losing myself in the process. I was enough, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace with that truth. As I closed my eyes that night, the weight of the past began to lift. I no longer had to play the role of the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect friend. I didn't need to constantly prove my worth through my sacrifices. I was enough as I was. Tomorrow, I would wake up and do something I hadn't done in a long time. I would live for me. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful gift I could give myself